He is a murderer. He's a multiple murderer. He's a vicious murderer. I feel that if he hadn't received the death penalty, that we probably would have shortchanged everybody else on death row.
John Linley Frazier was born to Patricia Pascal and William B. Frazier 1 month prematurely on the 26th of January 1946. At 2 years old, his mother would leave his father, who was known to be a bit of a drinker and a ladies' man. In 51, Frazier and his mother would move to San Francisco, where he was placed with a strict Catholic foster family for 2 years due to his mother's work schedule. In 52, Frazier was involved in his first car accident, in which he suffered a broken collarbone and a concussion. He was a sickly child, suffering from measles, constant colds, a ruptured appendix, and what was thought to be pneumonia, but was later diagnosed as tuberculosis. He also developed a habit of sleepwalking and bedwetting, which continued into his adulthood. In what appears to be his first brush with the law, Frazier was arrested for shoplifting a penknife. After this, he and his mother moved to Santa Cruz, California. Not learning from his past misdeeds, Frazier and his new friends were detained for vandalism and repeated shoplifting in 58. Frazier attended elementary and middle school in Capitola, followed by Santa Cruz High School, which he left in 61 during his freshman year. Later in 61, continuing his rebellious streak, he was charged with theft and sent to the Department of Youth Authority. In November of that year, Frazier went to live with another foster family, but not enjoying his surroundings, he stole a gun and ran away from the foster home. When he was arrested, his excuse for stealing the gun was that it was to be used to hunt for food. He was sent to a juvenile forestry camp, Camp Owen in Kernville, California. In 66, Frazier completed his juvenile parole, returning to work around Santa Cruz as a service station attendant and mechanic, at one point working at Disco Discount Store, where he meets his future wife, Dolores. Although Dolores was married at the time, they slowly begin a relationship. Dolores divorces her husband to marry Frazier in 67, both moving to a small cabin in the woods, as they both favoured nature over the city life. The marriage begins with the then unemployed Frazier rolling and destroying their uninsured car. Frazier does manage to find a job the day that Dolores is laid off from hers, luckily enough. He would then bounce between jobs, constantly finding problems with either the work or his colleagues. Frazier's run-ins with the law didn't cease with married life either. Frazier was also cautioned by the police after being picked out of a lineup when a high school girl complained to the police about a man following her and making lewd comments. He lied to his wife, saying that of course it wasn't him, and he just fit that description. Frazier was in a life-changing accident on May 16, 1970, in which he rear-ended another car in Scotts Valley, California. Frazier claims that he heard a voice during the collision, a voice telling him he should never drive again, lest he be killed. The voices would continue from that day onward. The officer at the scene reported that Frazier did not appear to be severely injured. According to Dolores, upon returning home, Frazier looked depressed, and she got an intense, strange feeling from him. Frazier had a bump on his forehead. He refused to go to the doctor to have it seen, instead sitting in silence for hours. Later that day, he, his wife, and a roommate Alison would take some hallucinogens. These had an adverse effect on Frazier, who became increasingly irritable. At one point, he sat his wife Dolores and Alison down and began to preach to them. We were to study under him the ways to treat the earth. He kept on talking like that. It was almost biblical. Every move he made, every action was very dramatic. He was trying to play music along with this, but the tape kept messing up. I guess he'd been planning how he was going to present this, and the music wasn't going right, and he got really frustrated and started speaking really aggressively, like something was about to burst. Then he would look up and say, "I'm sorry, Father." He preached on that occasion for close to 6 hours. And from that day onward, he continued to rant about man's effect on nature. Frazier quit his job the day following the accident. His new doctrine of total harmony with nature seemingly forbade him from contributing to pollution. Despite this, he would continue to drive and work on cars occasionally. He began studying the Bible, astrology, tarot cards, sometimes disappearing for days at a time into the woods with his research materials, climbing a water tower with weapons and looking around with binoculars, so no unknown assailants could sneak up on him. When his mother tried to intervene, Frazier would rave about the Book of Revelations being directed to him and only him, believing himself to be John the Revelator, a biblical figure that received messages from God he should pass on to the masses. When his mother tried to get medical help for him, he ran off, later calling his mother, exclaiming that she tried to do him in, and that, "You're all working against me now. I don't trust none of you turkeys." He became increasingly paranoid, pacing, reacting to every noise, and suspected people were plotting to hospitalise or attack him, wearing sunglasses outside so the devil couldn't get into his eyes. Frazier and Dolores argued frequently about his increasingly erratic behaviour. On the 4th of July 1970, Frazier chose to leave their marital home with all the possessions that he had purchased, and moved into an old milk shack on his mother's property, only accessible by a rickety rope bridge. From his 6x6 foot shack, he began observing with binoculars the home of the Ohta family. Dr. Victor Ohta was a well-liked and respected eye doctor in the area. He had set up his ophthalmology practice 10 years prior. Born in Montana, Ohta began working various jobs to put himself through college and supporting his parents. He joined the army in 1943 until 1945, after which he returned to college before enrolling in Northwestern University and medical school. The Ohtas moved to Santa Cruz in late '59. Dr. Ohta set up his own medical practice, which was incredibly successful from the beginning. The Ohta house was designed and built without disturbing any trees and integrated with the natural surroundings in a large meadow, something you would think Frazier would approve of. Dr. Ohta lived on the property with his wife Virginia and young sons Derek and Taggart. He also had 2 teenage daughters, Torin and Lark, who were being educated out of the state during 1970. Frazier's mother's property in the surrounding area was known for having a few hippie communities. Neighbours remember him complaining about the Ohtas and their neighbours, saying they were rednecks who lacked respect for nature and were materialistic, which were attributes that conflicted with his heavenly revelations. During his time staying in the minuscule shack, he would drink and continue taking hallucinogens. He began to declare to those around him there was a revolution coming. 5th of October 1970, Frazier broke into a neighbour of the Ohtas, stealing 38 and 22 caliber handguns, calling a friend afterwards exclaiming he thought about waiting on the owners to return and snuffing them, but left before they arrived. On the 17th of October, after spending the night with Dolores, Frazier says he is leaving and moving eastwards on the 19th, and he and Dolores borrow a truck and pack everything in his shack. Whenever the trip is mentioned, he becomes distressed, as if it's not something he even wishes to do. They bring some items that he had previously taken back to Dolores' cabin and visit their neighbours, where Frazier discusses tarot cards, going into detail about certain cards and their meaning with them. Later, at Dolores' home, their neighbours join them in watching a film, but Frazier is on edge, pacing and peering through windows throughout the night. On Sunday the 18th of October, Frazier leaves Dolores' with an orange backpack, food, and a stolen 38, along with some new binoculars. The binoculars would later be confirmed as the Ohtas, having been stolen in a previous break-in. Returning to his mother's property Sunday night, Frazier ate, and without saying a word besides later, left and slept outside near the Ohta property.
Nighttime net of security was set up at all entrances leading to Dr. Ohta's mountaintop home, after firemen responding to a fire in that home Monday evening.
On Monday the 19th of October, Frazier approached a neighbouring property of the Ohtas, but they were not home, so proceeded to the Ohta residence. He arrives around noon, armed with 2 previously stolen guns. Mrs. Ohta was seen at the Santa Cruz travel agency around 12:40 and 1 p.m, confirming the family's plans to go to Hawaii for Thanksgiving. Around 2:15 p.m, she was seen at the Santa Cruz Savings and Loan Bank before returning home for unknown reasons. Upon her return, she is ambushed by Frazier, who bound and blindfolded her with one of her husband's collection of silk scarves before moving her to the back bedroom. Frazier later advised she worried about being assaulted, and he assured her there would be no assault and mixed her a drink. He then berated her for his perceived lack of respect for nature, evidencing the animal skins throughout the house and the seemingly materialistic lifestyle her family lives. Mrs. Ohta at some point alluded people will become suspicious if she does not collect her boys from school. Frazier then cut the telephone line and destroyed the receiver in the bedroom. Around 4 p.m, Taggart called his father's office, advising his mother had not picked him up from his school. Dr. Ohta asked his secretary, Miss Cadwallader, to pick up Taggart. Shortly after Miss Cadwallader left to collect Taggart, Derek phoned, advising he had also not been collected from his school. Ohta then left work to pick him up. Along the way, they stopped off at Dr. Ohta's mother's house for a few moments before continuing home. Mrs. Cadwallader returned to the house with Taggart before Dr. Ohta. Frazier immediately took them prisoner, tying them both up and separating them throughout the house. Dr. Ohta then arrives home with Derek a short time later, and they too are both subdued. Both are bound again using scarves. Derek is then placed in a room before Dr. Ohta is taken poolside. Frazier engages in the same argument that he had with Mrs. Ohta. He accuses Dr. Ohta of destroying natural life and the environment, that he is responsible for ruining the Santa Cruz Mountains by building his home there. Dr. Ohta tries to bargain with Frazier for his family's lives, offering anything he wants, including money. Frazier is greatly angered by this and counters that they both burn the house down, returning balance to nature. Ohta apparently became agitated by this, and Frazier proceeded to push him into the pool. Frazier then claims he extended a hand to help Ohta out of the pool, and Ohta tried to strike or pull him into the water. Frazier then retaliated by pushing Ohta away and firing on him 3 times. Frazier then retrieved Mrs. Ohta, asked if she believed in God. When she confirmed that she did, he replied, "Then you have nothing to be afraid of," and fired his gun. He then repeated this process with Miss Cadwallader, and again with Derek, and finally Taggart. Later, Frazier would claim he wished to release Taggart, but the boy confirmed he had seen Frazier's face. The family and Mrs. Cadwallader were then placed into the pool, the shell casings collected, and the home was set alight with 4 to 5 small fires in the kitchen area. Frazier moved Dr. Ohta's Rolls Royce and Mrs. Cadwallader's Lincoln cars, parking them to obstruct the driveway entrances of the home to stop the inevitable fire engines, and disabling both vehicles so they could not be moved. He then placed a note under the windscreen wiper of Dr. Ohta's car before escaping in Mrs. Ohta's dark green Oldsmobile. When firefighters managed to gain access onto the property, they went to connect to the fire hydrant that had been placed near the pool, purposely installed to make use of the pool water. Upon reaching the pool, they discovered what they initially thought to be a mannequin, floating, draped across the float line of a pool vacuum. But the realization dawned on them when they noticed 4 more bodies hiding beneath the water line.
It really scares you to look forward at the world, the way things is. And it seems like that the Lord is just fading out in it. And that's the way it looks to me.
The fire, combined with heavy rain washing away external evidence and the lack of shell casings, made it a difficult crime scene to investigate. Not helping was the camera used for the first 36 crime scene photos taken by investigators not having any film in it. Santa Cruz's sheriff office would hold a press conference at 1:15 a.m, noting an APB had been issued for Mrs. Ohta's Oldsmobile and advising the possibility of multiple assailants and their belief that the fire was set to draw attention to the crime. When asked about a possible note left behind, they declined to comment. Due to the recent Tate LaBianca murders carried out by the Manson family, tensions between the gradually growing hippie population and the normal residents began to rise. There was an increase in gun sales, calls for vigilantism, and 4 bomb threats made to a local hippie bar, The Catalyst. A note left at the adjoining store stating, "The only good hippie is a dead one." October 20th, Mrs. Ohta's Oldsmobile was spotted all over the road, speeding through the mountains by a telephone worker on a pole. Instead of phoning to notify the police, the worker proceeds to drive to the sheriff's office and wait in line to report he knows the vehicle's whereabouts almost an hour after seeing it. At almost the same time, a call came over the radio reporting a fire in the nearby Rincon Tunnel. A slow-moving train had struck the vehicle within the tunnel at 4:45 p.m. The driver's seat of the vehicle had been set on fire but extinguished without significant damage. The vehicle hood was still warm, meaning it had not been abandoned long. Witnesses seeing the vehicle on the road believed they seen 2 men and a woman in the vehicle with an orange backpack. Police also found evidence of 3 footprint patterns from the vehicle. October 21st, a press conference is held detailing the note left on Dr. Ohta's car.
Today, World War III will begin as brought to you by people of the free universe. From this day forward, anyone and or company of persons who misuses the natural environment or destroys the same will suffer the penalty of death by the people of the free universe. I and my comrades from this day forth will fight until death or freedom against anything or anyone who does not support natural life on this planet. Materialism must die or mankind will. Knights of the Wands, Knights of Cups, Knights of Pentacles, Knights of Swords.
Roger Crone, a neighbour of Frazier's, notified the police advising they had discussed the tarot cards mentioned in the note and Frazier's unhinged views on environmentalism. On the 22nd of October, a police conference is held revealing Frazier as a suspect. Police units are put in place to monitor Frazier's shack. On the 23rd of October at 7:30 a.m, Frazier is arrested, sleeping in his shack, having snuck past the police surveillance. On his person is a knife with traces of copper wire like those used in telephone lines. Upon being held at gunpoint during his arrest, it's alleged he said, "Why don't you give me what I deserve?"
Most were potential jurors who had been summoned for examination by defense attorney James Jackson, who claimed that Frazier was not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity.
Frazier is arraigned and denies any involvement in the murders. His court-appointed public defender James Jackson enters a plea of not guilty on 5 counts of murder. He believes Frazier to be insane, which is supported by a clinical psychologist, David Marlowe. The orange bag is later retrieved from Frazier's mother's chicken coop, containing a knife and a .45 caliber pistol. The trials of Frazier were moved to San Mateo County at the behest of his attorney James Jackson, who entered a plea of innocent by reason of insanity. Dr. Lund, a psychologist hired on behalf of the defence, said Frazier showed signs of paranoid schizophrenia, having grand delusions that he was selected by God to save the earth and that he was being hunted down by unknown assailants. He also said that in his condition, Frazier was unable to reconcile that it was unethical to kill people, judged by his standards to be destroying the planet. At one point, Frazier cuts himself writing "freedom" and "pigs" on his cell wall, similar to the messages left at the Tate LaBianca murders by the Manson family. He also shaved half his head completely, including his beard and a single eyebrow. This was thought to be a ploy by Frazier to feign mental illness to the jury so he could be found sane. He would rather be sentenced to death than a mental institution. District Attorney Peter Chang of the prosecution detailed how Frazier had tried to enlist others in his upcoming revolution against the materialists and evidenced the guns stolen from the Ohta neighbours, witnesses placing him in Mrs. Ohta's vehicle, the orange backpack with knife and a gun, and later one of the Ohta boys' watches being found on his mother's property as proof of his guilt. He also considered the insanity plea to be Frazier attempting to deceive the defence and their psychologists. On the 10th of December, 1971, Frazier was found sane. On the 15th of December, he was sentenced to death. Tragically, in 1977, Torrin Ohta took her own life, followed by Dr. Ohta's mother 2 years later. The Ohta family is survived by Lark Ohta, who left Santa Cruz to live with a friend's family, who became her legal guardians. California repealed the death penalty in 1977, and Frazier was resentenced to life imprisonment. Every 7 years he was denied parole, until eventually he stopped attending his own parole hearings. On the 13th of August 2009, John Linley Frazier was found hanging in his cell.